when you completely identify with your form identity, the physical body, and even more importantly, the psychological form of you, the invisible you that consists of thought and emotion, the mental, emotional, invisible mental, emotional entity that is who you are on a certain level. When you're completely identified with every arising thought and every arising emotion and every arising reaction, that's ego. The complete identification with that is ego. But when there's no longer a complete identification, there's still form identity. You may experience thoughts arising without knowing why they suddenly arise. And yet, if there's even a slight awareness in the background that these are thoughts, you're not totally invested with your sense of self in every thought that arises. And if a thought that tells you something unpleasant about yourself or your life, certain judgment about my life, isn't it all so pointless now? It has come to this. Why do I have to deal with this again and again? Well, it's just not, there's no end to it. What's the point of it all? Why is it always me that has to do that stuff? Why, and then these thoughts perhaps have arisen in you for many years, periodically and regularly. And suddenly you notice that these thoughts are arising that are telling you that you're not getting anywhere in your life, that most of your search and your activities have been futile. What have I got to show for it? Absolutely nothing have I got to show. What's this? Okay, and suddenly there's an awareness of these thoughts, and you might notice that these are thoughts that are not new. And so you're not totally invested in the thoughts. That means those thoughts that have certain judgments about your life, gradually they lose the capacity to make you unhappy because you don't completely believe in them anymore. They're recognized as thought patterns, conditioned mind. And then after a while, they even subside. You have them less frequently. So it's no longer ego. Now, as the presence arises, usually it does not very easily necessarily become integrated into your form identity. When I went through a transition, externally very little changed, and mine was unusual because it came drastically and was drastic and very sudden. But it didn't immediately change anything much externally. I was still engaged in the academic world for 3 more years after that, or 4, and didn't fully realize that that wasn't right for me anymore. It took time. I didn't know any more than I did before. There was just peace in the background. And occasionally, the pull towards unhappiness came a few times, like a pull on your sleeve in the form of a thought. Come this way. Follow me, says the unhappy thought that says something about you and your life. And I noticed it, I didn't follow it, but I could have followed it, and then I would have been lost again in mind identification, and perhaps after a while come out again. Now, a question that is very interesting and complex, the answer is complex, and I'm often asked this question: do you need to develop what people call a healthy ego? I was often asked that. Do I need to develop a full, healthy, functioning ego before I can transcend the ego? Well, no ego is completely healthy, because every ego has certain elements of dysfunction, and there may be certain corners in your life. But it is true that as far as your form identity is concerned, there is a development as you grow older. And to some extent, whether or not you can integrate the arising presence with your form identity, to some extent has something to do with where you are at as this form identity in your life cycle. There was a spiritual teacher in the early 20th century, Gurdjieff, who said, I don't totally agree with him, but there's some truth there. He said that unless you're already fully established in the physical realm, so you have a meaningful work and you have built up your life and you have taken responsibility for your family and you have all built up all that, he said, then you can embark on spiritual work. Don't even attempt to embark on spiritual work unless you have first achieved maturity in the physical realm. There's some truth in that, but you cannot, there are so many exceptions, you cannot really have one general rule that applies to everybody. But, yes, let's say you are a man or woman in the early 20s. Let's say that you are exploring life. You are kind of finding yourself, as you put it, when you talk to yourself and others. Let's say that you have already explored various avenues, none of which you found satisfying. You went to college, but after 2 years it was getting a bit boring, and you left. Then tried something else, then you had a few jobs, but they didn't work out that well either. You had some interesting sexual encounters, but no relationship lasted for more than 3 weeks because we were totally immature emotionally and are stuck at the level of an 8-year-old. And one day you walk across the street and you've been smoking some weed, and so you're not paying attention, you get hit by a car. And then you find yourself in hospital with a serious condition, and when you wake up, something happened. That shock brought about an opening in your form identity, and you can suddenly feel some great power in you. And then finally you come out of hospital, you realize that in certain situations involving other people, you speak spiritual truths. It just comes. You suddenly find yourself entering that state, and you talk, and you don't know what's happening. And then at other times, you're just the normal person that you were before. And then you read a few books, and then you talk a bit more, and suddenly you become a spiritual teacher. But your form identity basically is still the same as it was before, except a crack has appeared in it. And through that crack, the transcendent dimension from time to time emerges.